Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters. This is a unique Integrity Matters piece, which is we're going to be looking at tackling e-cheating. But before we begin, I would like to just ask anyone who's currently joining the sessions to just let us know who introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and what institutions you're currently working with, and if you have anything you'd like to say with regards to the session or what you're looking at for in this session today, please put that in the chat. We'll give it another 2-3 minutes just so that the numbers go up and we can have everyone join the session, then we'll kick it off. Got Sai from Sydney. Yes, we can. I will do another introduction. Thanks for the correction. I appreciate that. That's Peter from Melbourne, Manila, Philippines. And how are we doing for numbers? New Zealand. Brisbane. Wow, there's a lot of people on the call today. We'll give it another couple of minutes and just so we can get a lot of introductions in, get a lot of people settled in. Anyone who's joining us, welcome. Wow. All right, I'm a bit overwhelmed just looking at the chat, so I'm just gonna say welcome to everyone. Wow, it's amazing. Excellent. So I think we're going to give it a go. But before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Chukwudi Ogo. I'm popularly known as Chooks. I am the Assessment Solutions Consultant for Turnitin Asia Pacific. As it is customary for us to do here in Australia, I'd like to acknowledge all our elders, both past, present, and emerging. I'm currently beaming into the session from Essendon, working remotely, and so I'm on the Wurundjeri land. I also like to acknowledge the elders, both past, present, and emerging, for all the participants who are joining the session. Very appreciative of the opportunity to use this platform here in Turnitin, Australia, to tackle e-cheating and assessment security. My special guest today, and I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to do this today, is with Professor Phillip Dawson, who is the Associate Director of CRADLE, which is the Center for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning. This is a Q&A session, and we are collaborating with CRADLE to put together this very unique session where we want to go deeper, responding to your questions with regards to the Integrity Matters by Turnitin conversations we've been having the past couple of months. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we encourage you to join us in our socials, Turnitin APAC, and the Twitter handle is @Turnitin APAC. Over to you, Phil. Thanks for joining us. I would love for you to introduce CRADLE and shed some light on what CRADLE is, and also your book in general.
Great, thanks so much, Chooks. Wonderful to be here with you and with everybody at this joint event. It's the first CRADLE seminar that we've done in this sort of jointly badged way, so it's an exciting thing to do. Yes, so I'm Phil from CRADLE at Deakin University, and I'm coming in from Wurundjeri land here in Armidale in Melbourne. So a little bit about CRADLE. We are a research centre. We're based at Deakin University. We do research into assessment and digital learning in higher education largely, but also professional education, a lot of stuff in medical education and some other stuff like that. CRADLE really is at the forefront of research in a few spaces. If I can tout some of our work, assessment design, that sort of thing. A lot of work on feedback practices, feedback literacy, and also the sort of stuff I'm going to talk about today around cheating, academic integrity, assessment, security. I think there's a lot of CRADLE people in the chat today, which is really wonderful to see my colleagues. And yeah, please do follow us on @CRADLEDeacon. Hopefully someone will chuck that into the chat for us.
Thanks. Thank you, Phil. Really good to meet you all. And before we start, I want to calibrate the session by just picking up a word from, or a phrase from Phil's book, Defending Assessment Security in a Digital World. Phil, you describe e-cheating as cheating that uses or is enabled by digital technology. And the very first question we're going to be addressing is looking at contract cheating. And the question goes along the lines of Course Hero is seeking some legitimacy through educational seminar series and listing academics on the website. And how it has acquired alarmingly good phrasing tool, Quillbot. How do you see this as impacting contract cheating?
Yeah, oh gee, this is a really interesting one. So there is a real rise in these quite large businesses that, I mean, I'll just say it, a lot of what they do is cheating. They also do some legitimate stuff. Chegg, for instance, started off as a textbook hire company. And to me, that sounds like a pretty reasonable thing. People should be able to get textbooks in different ways. But your Cheggs and your Course Heroes are very large. They're worth a lot of money. Last time I checked, Chegg was worth $12 billion US, which is a huge amount of money. So it's really hard for us to be operating in this sort of environment where the cheating providers are worth an order of magnitude more than the private businesses that try and deal with cheating. With tools like Quillbot, that's a really interesting one. So, we are seeing a rise in tools that support students to paraphrase, and even a rise in tools that can actually write work for students. And I see that as our challenging future here that we're probably not paying enough attention to. We've had a lot of conversation in the sector around contract cheating, which is where students get someone else to do the work for them. But how does it fit when, technology writes the whole piece for you, or technology takes your copy-pasted work from somewhere and paraphrases it for you? So I think this is a real challenge for our future.
Excellent. Just before we continue, something I missed in my introduction is, if anyone has questions, I know that this is a Q&A session, but if you do have questions, please use your Q&A chat box. You can post your questions. If we do have capacity, we'll get to those questions where we can. But for the focus of this session, I would like to focus on the submitted questions, and so that we can get across those. Then every now and then we can look at the chat forum. Welcome again, anyone who's just joined this session. This is a session in collaboration with CRADLE, Deakin's CRADLE, the Center for Research in Assessment and Digital Learning. Now, the second question goes like this. It says, do or can academic honor codes example? I affirm that I will not, as being an example there, work in trying to thwart e-cheating. How do we do it right in a digital world?
Yeah, so honor codes are where we get students to sign on to something at the start of their studies, or optionally at any point in their studies, where they say that they will act with integrity. They're a statement of understanding of ethical principles around doing your own work, and also an intent or a promise to behave in a certain way. The good news about honor codes is that there's reasonably strong evidence that they help in reducing rates of cheating. And the bad news about honour codes is they don't help a huge amount. Like, they don't solve the problem for us. They're like a piece in a puzzle or a layer that we might want to use, but they can't be the only thing that we use. I think as applied specifically to e-cheating and all sorts of various new types of cheating that are coming through, we want to make sure that honour codes specifically address some of the new modes of cheating that are coming through. So we do still get students coming through claiming that they were tricked into contract cheating because the website, when they Googled for legitimate study help, they went to a website that looked pretty legitimate, that then offered to do the work for them, and they didn't know that this was the wrong thing to do. I'm pretty skeptical about that line of argument. But if we apply this to other types of cheating, like, say, using an automated algebra solver, so these are tools that can solve a lot of complex mathematical problems for us. If we want to use an honour code, we need to say things about what sort of help and support is okay and what sort of help isn't okay. Because it's one thing people saying, I'm not going to cheat, but it's another thing them understanding what not cheating means.
Yeah. Talking about students, one of the next question is actually around, was sent through by a student, and it says, have those who say that in-person, paper-based invigilated exams have the best academic integrity, to your knowledge, Phil, ever provided evidence to support that argument?
Oh, I love this question. So thanks so much to the student who's posted that question. Because we do have an assumption that cheating is less likely to happen or easier to catch in a paper-based exam setting compared to pretty well any other type of assessment. There is a bit of an assumption going around about that. And in David Carlis's paper on trust, distrust and assessment reform, he sort of goes into what are some of the reasons why we might trust certain types of assessments more than others. And a lot of it's just tradition. A lot of it's what we've always done. I'm not aware of really strong, robust evidence about paper-based exams being more secure than other types of assessment in terms of resistance to cheating, not being able to cheat, or in terms of being able to detect cheating. There is some evidence about sort of contract cheating, or it's called third-party cheating, in a paper that was led, I think, by Rowena Harper from a couple of years ago, that looked at student-reported rates of cheating in exams versus other types of assessment, assignments, and also teacher-detected rates of this third-party cheating in exams and in other types of tasks. And students reported more of the third-party cheating in the exams than in the assignments, and teachers reported seeing less of it in the exams than in the assignments. So there's some caveats with that research because, it's self-report and it's comparing two data sets that it might not be legitimate to compare. But to me, that's the best evidence I'm aware of, and it's not in favour of paper-based exams.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I actually think more work needs to be done in that area just to get a sense of that. And clearly the student actually wanted to get an answer with regards to that. And thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. I think one of the burning questions, going back to the question with regards to the paraphrasing tool, is the next question is actually referring to how can contract cheating be detected?
So I think contract cheating detection is, the first thing I'd say is it's not impossible, because there's a pervasive sort of myth in the sector that it's not possible to detect contract cheating, and I think that's really unhelpful. So firstly, it is possible. The second thing I'd like to say is there's sort of a bit of a distinction to draw here between the initial hunch that possibly contract cheating has happened here, and then the proof that contract cheating has happened. My work has largely been in the initial hunch stage. So, at Deakin, in collaboration with Wendy Sutherland Smith, we've done a whole bunch of studies where we've given assignments to markers and we've asked them, tell us which ones are contract cheating and which ones aren't. And across a few different studies, about 60% of the time, markers, Deakin everyday markers that we've paid to do this, have been able to tell us which ones the contract cheating ones were. So that's quite promising. The ways that they found it, to me, seemed largely to be discipline-specific ways that people who did this work a lot kind of had in their heads. They knew what looked like a normal response and what looked like something really weird. Now, outside of our work, some people have done some work with looking at, metadata, looking at the names of some common contract cheaters. There's a whole bunch of sort of heuristics that people have. So it definitely is possible. We also did a study with a quite early alpha version of Turnitin's authorship product, and we found that improved detection rates significantly. So, use of software is another approach that can help. And we also found that training markers significantly improved their accuracy at detection. So we ran what was quite a short workshop with markers, just 2-3 hours worth. And that resulted in quite significant improvement in detection rates. Now, this is the initial detection. The next step of proving it, I think really institutions need to invest in specialist staff who do this for a living, who have the time and the expertise to do a really good job at this. But I think everyday academics need to know that they are the front line of this and they will see things. If they see something, they should talk to whoever their responsible people are at their institution.
Yeah, that also just makes me remember one of Kath Ellis's phrase, which is make that someone's job, so that we can get it done. That's really, really, really important. I'm actually tempted to want to speak to one of the questions in the Q&A. It says a worrying trend is high schools starting to promote learning support materials on sites like Course Hero. Do you know how much awareness exists in the secondary school space on academic cheating? I'm going to say the other space is not part of that question. Yeah.
So schools are working on this. I'd say Australia and the region are sort of quite advanced in higher ed in terms of addressing this and in terms of taking it as a serious problem. Schools are not as far advanced in that, but there has been some engagement. I do a small amount of engagement work with schools where I'll go in and have a chat with teachers and talk with them about this sort of thing. And it seems like the awareness of some of the issues isn't as big. I'm really concerned about promoting Course Hero. I find that to be a really difficult problem. It's a really hard space, though, because I know that there's at least one person who considers themselves to be an academic integrity researcher who is out there giving talks for Course Hero. That said, I think they'd probably be quite upset that I was out here giving a talk in partnership with Turnitin, because I know this space, there is a set of people who believe that any attempts to really detect cheating, to routinely look at students' work and consider if it is actually their own work. There are people who believe doing that is what causes the problem, is what drives the problem. I really think that's misguided. I don't agree with that. But I know that there are people who don't actually see sites like Course Hero as the cause of the problem. I think they are a problem. I think if anyone from techs are here, I think it's your Course Heroes and your CHEGs that should be the real targets of that current legislation. Is anyone here from big tech companies? I think they're the organisations we should work to deplatform. The CHEGs, the Course Heroes, the EduBirdies, those sort of things. I think they are a big part of the problem.
just to stretch that question a little bit, there's a question here, and I think I'm trying to, because we've got a lot of questions, I'm trying to compress some of them into one. A stretch on that question is looking at what are your thoughts on how we can overcome the challenge of students using paraphrasing software?
Yeah, so I think paraphrasing software is a challenge. So just for anyone who's not aware, there are a whole bunch of different sites out there that will take text and then change it into some completely new words for you. And text matching tools are not going to spot that sort of paraphrasing. However, they also can't spot it when a student does sham paraphrasing themselves. I think we've gotten pretty hung up on the integrity problem being the exact verbatim use of other people's words. And I don't think it's that. I think the integrity problem is when people use other people's ideas or work. And yeah, we can see that really obviously when they use other people's words, but we haven't brought students on a journey if they see paraphrasing as the key thing. I think for a while we've had sort of the ability to paraphrase as an unstated learning outcome for almost every written task, and it's not always the main thing. So I could see a future perhaps where paraphrasing with integrity is something that we do, and where we go, hey, 50 years from now, technology's advanced to a point where it paraphrases better than people do, and we offload the paraphrasing task to the technology, but we keep the integrity of saying these are someone else's ideas, but here's sort of a more concise expression of them, or here's a more useful expression for me right now. I may be being a bit idealist. I know that right now, the sort of sham paraphrasing through the use of these tools is creating quite a problem. But I guess I'd be looking for, when students do that, there should still be evidence that they haven't used the ideas of others with integrity. And that's the higher level concept we might want to use, rather than the lower level thing of, do the words match? Yeah,
I think that's a really great area. The way I see things, I feel just like music and words, nothing's original anymore. So when it comes to paraphrasing, I feel at some point we'll be speaking the same language, using the same phrases, that everything's going to be similar. The question is, how do we identify that a student understands what we want them to do in a piece of writing, and they understand the objective for which that writing was posed? Now we're going to move into this sort of the assessment securities part, and I think one of the phrases that caught my attention reading the book is assessment security starts where academic integrity finishes. The question is not around that, but I just thought I'd frame that before going into this, because we're looking at trying to understand what is assessment security, what's e-cheating, contract cheating, and academic integrity. But this question is looking at the piece where you talk about authentication. It says, how close are we to develop technologies that can authenticate users and therefore assure education providers of assessment integrity?
Fantastic. So I'm going to start off by just talking about sort of a bit of the terminology here that I use. So I guess a key thing that I do in the book is distinguish between academic integrity and assessment security. So academic integrity has of late kind of been crafted up with all sorts of stuff in there that's not part of the real pure idea. I view academic integrity as the positive, educative, values-based mission about developing students so that they have the capability to do the right thing, so they want to do the right thing, and so they do the right thing. There's fundamental values of academic integrity. The International Centre for Academic Integrity is a good source on those, and that's a good, valuable mission. The other side of this is assessment security, which is us trying to assure that students have acted with integrity, that they haven't cheated. And that's where we have things like detection, deterrence, those sorts of things. A lot of approaches really sit in one camp or the other. So we talked about honour codes. Honour codes do nothing for assessment security. Full stop, end of story. You can sign in on a code and it does nothing to stop you from cheating, but it's an effective academic integrity approach. There are some things that maybe fall into a bit of both. So if you take something like, text matching tools, for instance, you can often see those used purely in an assessment security context to see if people have copy pasted, but there's also uses of those in more of an academic integrity context as a developmental tool with students where they can do that sort of formative checking on their work to try and see, oh, actually, I have a problem here. I need to do something about it. That's developing their understanding, their capability. Now, these two things are in tension, academic integrity and assessment security, but in the book and in my talks and whatever, I really push for a bit of a balanced approach. I'm not one of those people who says, you just got to trust the students and they'll be okay, or you've got to surveil them and watch they don't cheat or else, and that's all that matters. So there's the balance. Now, this question also asked about authentication. Authentication in the context of assessment security is a harder problem than authentication in the context of like a traditional logging into your email sort of problem. So when you log into your email, you got to provide your username and your password. You might have to provide some sort of two-factor authentication thing. They might send a message to your phone, or you might have an app that you've got to click a button on to say, yes, it's really me. Those sorts of things really, really hugely improve authentication. They're a wonderful thing. Everyone should use them. However, all of those things are authentication where the person doesn't want to give away their authentication. It's, I only want me to be able to authenticate. The assessment security authentication problem includes that problem, plus the problem of if I want you to be able to authenticate as me. Two-factor authentication won't solve that. Username and password won't solve it because I'll just give you all of those things. So the authentication problem becomes harder. We see things like showing a photo ID. We see things like comparing the picture from a webcam in a remote proctored exam with a picture stored on a database. I'm aware of some work being done at Deakin around authentication based on voice. So, getting students to say certain phrases, and then authentication happens from that. There's authentication based on keystrokes, all sorts of different things. There's even authentication based on the old-fashioned idea of actually sitting down with the student and you know who the student is. So you have a chat with them, which can be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And possibly it'd be great if we did a bit more of that authentication as well.
Wow.
But it's hard. It's a hard problem.
So you reckon that's actually going to be something, a space we're going to move into, having technology that supports that, or working out how we want to do that effectively for things like exams and assessments? Yeah. I think there's more to do in this space. If I think about what sort of keeps me up at night, and I think it feels like an impossible, intractable problem to get perfect, it's probably this authentication problem. But perfection's not sort of the only place that we want to get to. We want to get from where we are to a little bit better, and deploying different types of authentication approaches, the stylometrics stuff that's around now, like the authorship work that we did the study on, these tools that sort of compare a student's work against their previous work. Those sorts of things can also help us with authentication problems. I think we just want a lot of these different approaches that we try. And we also want to, ask ourselves, what are some of the unintended consequences or negatives of this? There's been a lot of critique of, say, remote proctored exams as being surveillance, that, for those authentication benefits, we lose things with students. So we want to challenge these approaches to authentication. Yeah. I'm going to break, thanks for making that contribution. I'm going to break the rule a bit. I know I said I was going to focus on the questions, but I can see some really interesting questions coming up. And I think one of the ones voted up is, do you know which institutions are doing a good job of this, making it someone else's job?
Oh, so the problem is, in the institutions that I say are doing it are only the ones I'm aware of, and they'll probably think, hey, we need more resourcing as well. And I think probably a lot of institutions need more resourcing. I would look at my own institution, Deakin University. I think we're doing a better and better job of making it someone else's job. We've got some very, very capable people at Deakin who really have expertise in this. And those people are handling more of this thing. I'd give a particular shout out to Rebecca Audrey, who's also a CRADLE PhD student, and to Nick Milne, as two people at Deakin who really know a lot about how all of this works and how it should work. I would also say University of New South Wales, and Kath Ellis is one of the people that's supported this idea, and Kane Murdoch as someone who really leads a team in this space. Those are two that I'd really point to. I think we as a sector are getting better at understanding what the job is, because it's a new type of job. It's not a job that we've traditionally had. We've sort of had people that handle administrative processes in this space, and people who chair committees in this space, but not so much people who know how to investigate a case and build up a body of evidence. So I think it's really interesting how that job is evolving in the sector.
Yeah, I'd be curious if anyone who's on the call, and if you know your university or institution does this particularly well, please post in the chat so we can learn from you. One of the things we're striving to do, turn it in with experts in the area, is actually learn from what's been done and share with the wider community. So in addition to Deakin University and University of New South Wales, which Phil has, if you feel your university is doing it well, your institution is doing it well, we'll particularly want to hear from you, because this is a space that we all want to explore in that process of learning. So moving on to my next question, it says, I kind of like this question, because this is where we're going to start thinking about, while we're encouraging, I wouldn't say discouraging, I'll say, while we're looking at the whole idea of paraphrasing, the question says, how do you provide opportunity for creative response options whilst ensuring integrity?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So tasks can be sort of open-ended to different extents. Probably the least open-ended question would be a true-false question, and the most open-ended task might be doing a PhD. And it's certainly possible to cheat in both of those things, and there are businesses that will do entire PhDs for you and whatever else. I think as you make a task more and more open-ended, and particularly as you make it something that needs the demonstration of higher level learning outcomes, different types of cheating become more or less of a problem. So for what sort of Biggs and Tang might call a unistructural or a multi-structural type of outcome, that's something that really tests if you know a particular fact, or if you know some list of facts. You need to stop a lot of different types of cheating. You could contract cheat that, yes, but you could also just kind of Google cheat that. And I would challenge anyone to say that they've never Googled the answer to a mandatory workplace compliance quiz. So those lower level tasks are vulnerable to quite a large range of cheating. When you get to more open-ended tasks that have larger potential response space, and they're at that sort of higher level learning outcomes, things like Googling the answer become not as much of a part of the problem. It becomes more on the contract cheating, get someone else to do it side of things. There's no way to make anything like that cheat proof. And there was some really unhelpful rhetoric that went around a few years back of, if we get rid of essays, we'll stop contract cheating, or if we set authentic assessments, we'll stop contract cheating. We now know that's not the case. I'd point to some of Kath Ellis's work that discusses how authentic assessment really can be contract cheated, and they've really got the proof of that. So authenticity or whatever else on its own won't stop it. I think that we need to have more check-ins with students as they go through work, and more sort of dialogue with students around pieces of work. So if a piece of work is really important, we might want to have some sort of a conversation with a student about it. So I'll point to something we've done in computer science. When I used to teach computer science, we would sit down with students and discuss the code with them and say, oh, wow, can you tell us how does this bit work? How does that bit work? It became really clear if the student had done their own work. I can point to an unpublished study we've got at Deakin that the results are too good to be true, which is why they haven't been published yet. We want to replicate this, where we got Deakin markers to sit down with students, and the students either were going to talk about a piece of work they had done or a piece of work we asked them to talk about that they hadn't done, that we'd purchased off a contract cheating site. And we paid the students to become really familiar with the cheated work. And every single time across several disciplines, across several students per discipline, every single time, the markers were able to tell if the students had done the work themselves just by having a conversation. So, I think for those bigger open-ended tasks, we can no longer apply some of the lower level things to deal with cheating. We need real human judgment, real conversations, on top of, some of the stuff that people do around detecting contract cheating.
Well, I think you've sort of alluded to the response to my next question with regards to Google and authentic assessment, but I'll read out the question and maybe you can add a few more words to that. It says, we always say that authentic assessment will solve the problem of cheating in today's digital world. To what extent do you agree with this idea? Is there really anything not Googleable?
Ooh, so this becomes hard, because if you extend the idea of Googleable out to, searching a whole bunch of different sites, then there are pre-written answers for a lot of tasks. And, instructors should be Googling their tasks. If you're an academic, you should be there searching the name of your unit, the unit code, the name of the assignment, to see, are there sort of pre-done versions of this out there? I think, though, if we're talking about ungoogleable, we often mean, that some sort of static response to the specific question won't be there. And I think going back to what we just talked about with open-ended questions might be the thing, setting more of those open-ended type tasks rather than closed ones where there's a very small response space. It's more likely you're going to hit those on Google.
Well, that's that. I think for anyone who has not purchased the book, I would encourage you to purchase the book, because what Phil just discussed is one of the key strategies. The idea of actually knowing what your students are doing in terms of cheating, so that you bring yourself up to speed with what's happening, so you see how you can revise your questions. If your questions are already been posted online before, you need to start thinking about how you what your new strategies in terms of developing new questions. So I'm going to do a quick segue back into the Q&A, and this is from Joanne Kelder. She says, I was provided several opportunities to cheat during my 1980 to 84 engineering degree, including offered access to a stolen exam paper being made available to fellow students living in a residential college. I wonder if digital technologies have democratized cheating.
Ooh, I love this question. Yeah. I mean, to what extent has cheating become more democratized or equitable is a really interesting one. I think that pay for contract cheating is not a good thing for equity, because it sort of sets up that if you got the cash, you can buy your way through it. So I think that's a really big problem. Though strangely, some of the assignments that we bought, Wendy Sutherland-Smith and Kevin Dallahan did an analysis of the marks that Deakin University markers gave those assignments. And there wasn't really a connection between how much we paid and how good the marks were. So that sort of threat to equity, I don't know about the sort of, if you've got heaps more money, if you get heaps better, though I suspect there's probably a real premium end of contract cheating that you can get something absolutely wonderful. I think, though, some of the sort of online communities out there where people are more doing sharing rather than purchasing. So, yeah, there are some sites where rather than having to pay, you upload your work and you get a credit that you can use to download other people's work and that sort of thing. That probably really is democratizing cheating. It's probably really sharing the labor of cheating. And I think in the future, we're probably going to see more downloadable cheating for online exams and those sorts of things, where you can download sort of cheat tools. We see this in things like online poker, online video games, where you can download sort of programs that give you an unfair advantage that bypass a lot of the security measures. I think we'll see those, and I think they're going to be expensive.
Yeah. That's quite worrying though, but I guess that's the world we're moving into. We've got to learn to re-strategize, to actually do the work to ensure that our students are aware of cheating, how it we are aware of how it's happening, then put in measures to mitigate that. A curious question, and I think this is also I've come across this in several other conversations online, is why do you think lecturers believe that an exam is the best assessment to reduce the possibility of student cheating?
This is an interesting one. I'll refer back to some research that Margaret Bierman from CRADLE and I co-led along with a whole bunch of colleagues across the sector. We looked at why do academics do assessment in the way that they do it. Hopefully someone can chuck into the chat the URL assessmentdecisions.org. That's where we've got all the resources out of that project about, how do academics do assessment design. I remember being in an interview with a pair of science academics, and they were telling me about their assessment design and all that. And I said to them, so did you ever think of just not having an exam? And there was a long pause, when one of those sort of long, uncomfortable, strange pauses, just followed up by, no, I don't think we did. And it was quite a shift from tradition to think of a context where there wouldn't be an exam. In another interview, I had a chat with an academic who was teaching a unit that had been around for a very long time. That unit had been around for more than 50 years. And a lot of the assessment structure was very much the same as it was when the unit was first designed. I think we hold on to exams for a lot of those reasons. There's a lot of inertia around it. To do anything that's not an exam is to be proposing an alternative to an exam. And it's assessed as if, you're doing something radical, you're doing something strange. The burden of proof on you to show that your thing that's not an exam is cheat proof is much higher than the burden on people who stick with exams. And I'd say as well, to some extent, we, with exams, we pay people to stand there and watch students and make sure they're not cheating. So I think we put some trust that if we're doing that, surely that must be working. I don't think it's as effective as we think it is. I'd encourage people to go onto sites like WikiHow and look at their wonderful exam cheating guides. There's so much there that I'd never heard of. Have a look. It's beautiful stuff. Well, terrifying stuff, but beautiful.
I was going to say that it's beautiful, but very terrifying at the same time. All right, I'm going to pick up another question from the Q&A, and this is from Gordon Kane. I should have been calling names out, but thank you to anyone who's posting this. How useful is the idea of training and assessing students to demonstrate and use their own academic voice to explain everything themselves and not simply to collate the voices of others? I find this to be a crux of academic understanding and real learning.
Yeah, I think this is a great suggestion. I can't provide you with any sort of quantitative evidence on the effectiveness of this, but it's something that I really agree with you about a useful thing. I think we've all seen those student assignments that come through, and they've tried their hardest to, do it with integrity and show their sources. But really what you get is this patchwork of other people's voices and long block quotes, so many long block quotes, that sort of thing. It can be hard to train students out of that because it's such an appeal to authority, and we really drill into students that, almost what you think doesn't matter. We want you, anything you have to say, you're just making that up. You need to demonstrate that someone impressive in the literature said that thing. I think it's really hard to walk those two lines of, yes, we want to hear what you have to say, but we also want you to demonstrate how what you're saying connects with a conversation that might have been happening for hundreds of years around this topic. And I really like the entering a conversation metaphor. That's my preferred way to talk about academic writing. So there's some work on that in sort of academic research writing. I forget the author of the paper. It's someone in a medical education journal writes about sort of entering a conversation as a metaphor. But that's the one that I like to use with students. We want to hear your voice, but we want you to be part of that conversation rather than talking on your own or just parroting what other people have said.
Yeah, I think that answers Lorraine's question and how can it be done? How can it best be done? Another question that has popped up in from the entries is the idea of collusion. It says, how do we tackle collusion of quizzes and exams in large-scale courses, example, 1,000 students?
So I think this is really hard. I think the first thing we need is a really good definition of collusion. And I don't know, I was part of a conversation the other day and we all had a bit of a laugh that the definition of collusion is anything that we say collusion is. Because we say don't collude, but we're really unclear as to what that means. So I think we firstly need to say, what's collaboration? What's collusion? Where is the line? My now wife and I lived together throughout our entire undergraduate degree. And we both did largely the same assignments and we had conversations about those assignments. And I'm confident in the ethical approach that we took to doing that we didn't cross the line, though I'm not sure everyone would agree with the particular decisions we made at particular points in time. So I think that's really hard. I mean, there's some, approaches that people use to stop some of the most straightforward collusion. One of those would be if you're setting a multiple choice quiz, don't give everyone the same questions at the same time and not control the circumstances they take those in. It's a really big problem when we have tasks that have a weighting that makes them matter. They're worth a significant percentage and we don't supervise it and they're just MCQs. Because, you can do some forensic work looking at the common mistakes that people made or whatever. And that does really help us. But a significant number of students are still just going to collude on that. Some students will even say there's almost a communication that you're not really concerned about us colluding, because if you were, you would, proctor it or you'd set some other kind of task or something. Yeah. So I think we need to know what collusion is and we need to identify the circumstances where it could happen and take reasonable steps to stop it from happening. But the practice of having like a 50% unsupervised multiple choice quiz is just terrible. Nobody should be doing that.
Yeah, I think just to summarize what you mentioned there is the idea of providing clarity. What does collusion look like and what it isn't? I remember, and I might be wrong, is back in my La Trobe days, there was some work to show what collusion was, what collaboration looks like, and what it is not. I don't know if that's still part of the academic integrity module or that's since changed. But I think you do drive a good point there, because now even with the with remote learning and everything being done online, I'm sure people need to, there's a little bit of, we need to be social. We need to talk about the assessment and what that means and how we want to approach it. But does that mean we've actually worked with each other to get the job done? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we do really need to look at the positive behaviors that we can unwittingly stamp out through this. So, you know, I had some great conversations with people in the sort of peer learning student support community, and we wrote a piece in Campus Morning Mail a year or two ago about this. And also Anne Rogerson, who's also academic integrity background, was on that one too. And we argued that really we want to be encouraging peer learning and collaboration. We just need to have a really clear line. And it varies, like what different instructors are willing to accept. Some assessment tasks are meant to really be done as a single solo person, but some you can do it by yourself. You can talk with other people. It's not going to get in the way of us assessing the outcomes. And sort of a final space that I think plays into this as well is the idea of feedback and feedback literacy. We want students to be, you know, seeking feedback from their peers on their work. That's a good thing. If a student knows a student in a senior year to them, we want them to go to the student and have a feedback conversation about their work. But we need really clear understandings around what's acceptable. And I think that varies on a task by task basis.
Yeah. I'm just conscious that we are about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, and I believe we're going up until 3:30. Just for anyone who needs to jump up at 3 o'clock, which is 3 o'clock Australian time. We'll continue the session, but if you need to jump on, thank you for coming. But we'll continue the conversation up until 3:30 Australian time. The next question is quite fascinating, and it's long-winded, but I'll do my best to read it. This is in regards to our move from open book to open book in the online space. It says, we have moved from open book exams to open book online exams. And in both instances, we expect students to use the information available to them. Yet, in an online open book exam, student exams are submitted through Turnitin. This often yields high matches in declarative knowledge style questions, example definitions. As such, the unit coordinators are raising concerns about plagiarism. However, in a paper-based open book exam, these matches will not be subject to such scrutiny. Should we ignore these matches in open book exams? I'm assuming they mean open books in the online space.
Okay, so I guess I would start from an assessment design perspective, and I would say, so your declarative knowledge, you know, I mentioned sort of BIGS, unistructural, multistructural levels. Don't have an open book exam if you're assessing that. Just don't. If I say, it's essentially me saying to you, here's a book with the answers. Now tell me a specific answer. And you can just look at it. There's no assessment of learning there. The only active assessment that's going on there is your ability to look up the answers in the book and, you know, provide the definition of something, and you know how to get to the definitions in the book. So we should just stop doing that. However, I'm a huge fan of open book exams, and I just submitted a piece to the Deakin Teaching and Learning Conference arguing that online exams should be open book online exams mostly. I think we should, where we want to do lower level knowledge, we probably do need to do that in a closed book context. But in higher ed, often we don't really need to do that lower level stuff. If we have to, yes, do it in a closed book way. But let's try to do the higher level stuff, the stuff that we really are trying to assess at the degree level in an open book way. Because strangely enough, it kind of makes it more secure because we're no longer having to enforce this closed book prohibition. I'm really concerned that in an online exam, we usually can't enforce closed book. There's a ton of different ways you can cheat in a closed book online exam. I don't know. I'll give you a few fun ones. Get a clear screen protector, put it on your screen. Before you put it on there, write all the answers. If you're using a laptop or something and you've got to move the laptop around and show your entire area, your laptop camera can never actually see what's on that screen. Another alternative one is to put the cheat notes on the back. There's just tons of different ways to access those sorts of cheat notes. You can run your exam in a virtual machine. There's heaps of ways. I don't think we can honestly, hand on heart, enforced closed book in online exams very well. So I think we should stop trying to do so. So yeah, I guess my answer to the Turnitin match problem is more of a, if you get people to give you definitions from the book, they're going to have tons of matches.
Yeah.
But let's move away from that. Let's assess definition stuff in a closed book way, if we really need to assess the definitions, which we might not need to. And let's do the other stuff open book.
Excellent. Assessment for learning, assessment of learning. That's that conversation. This question is sort of looking at a little bit of contract cheating and authentication, but it just basically says, how do you see us overcoming contract cheating sites that move around and change the domain so easily?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. So we've got a few of the really big ones. You know, EduBirdie is probably the biggest one that very clearly markets itself as a contract cheating site. No one's pretending it's anything but that. And the strategies that we would use to try and take down EduBirdie might be things like the Texas legislation that, you know, they could try and get EduBirdie blocked or taken down or whatever. That sort of thing might be a useful strategy for the real big players. But for the real small ones, it's not going to be that shutting down individual sites, because that is the whack-a-mole game. Alexander Amagood has published some interesting work on sort of the social media shop fronts and how they're really easy to set up. So going back a few years, if you wanted to start a contract cheating site, you'd sort of go through this templated website process. Again, Kath Ellis has done some great work looking into how those websites operate and the front ends and the back ends and all that stuff. But now you might still do that if you want www.mytrueblueaussieessays.com or something. But instead of going through all that, you might just go onto Twitter and get one of those sort of free bot templates that monitors social media for when people write things like, I hate statistics, or, you know, this assignment sucks or whatever, and markets to them. And that's really quick and easy to set up. A lot harder to take down those individually. So what we need to do is work as a sector and put pressure, not so much on the cheating companies, but on the companies that make a profit from that. So that is, you know, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Visa, MasterCard, all of these companies that are involved in advertising or hosting or payment processing, they are able to take down gambling and child pornography and all sorts of other things, money laundering. If that is technically possible, I don't see how taking down cheating sites isn't equally possible. I just think enough pressure hasn't been put on them.
You raise an excellent point there. I think we all need to work collectively. I'm curious to know how many academics report sites when they see this, or how they do all the Twitter announcement. This site was just called. I'm curious to know if academics actively do those things. Moving on, there's a question. I'm going to go back to the Q&A from Sarah Keith. It says, do legitimized academic support services like Grammarly and Studiosity confuse students' understanding of academic integrity? Example, that Chegg offers similar services.
Oh, this is really interesting. I can't say I've got any hard evidence about that in the yes or no, but if you look at the way that these sorts of sites do present themselves, and there's that great paper Just Turn to Us by Christine Slade and colleagues that looks at how sites present themselves to students as, trying to be legitimate. I think it is possible that students are getting confused by that. And some people who work in that space do report that students are getting confused. I wouldn't pin it on Grammarly and Studiosity as creating this problem. I don't think they've created it. And I do think we need a legitimate student support enterprise existing. I'd love it if universities did that themselves rather than turning to private companies, but it doesn't seem to be the model that universities are doing. It seems like we are wanting to contract out some of that student support. So, those companies need to be able to put their piece forward. I think on the university end, we need to do more to train students about what is okay and what's not okay. One of the things about Studiosity, for instance, is that universities do have a formal arrangement with Studiosity, and that's something that's shown to students, and students are informed about that, and they can click through from the university to the thing. And similar arrangements might exist with Grammarly. But I wouldn't want to pin the problem on the student support sector. I'd say it's on us in not developing our students to understand the difference.
Yeah, I fully agree. And anyone who's watching this is not a debate at any of the Studiosity or Grammarly. This is just a question. We're trying to have a dialogue and a conversation. The next question, and this, I'm going to be biased here because I'm a huge fan of all things assessment literacy, show the students how to do the assessment, teach them how to use the tools and everything. So the question is from Emma Bernard. It says, does strengthening students' assessment literacy help in terms of cheating and plagiarism? Is there any evidence for this?
Yeah, so it's a hard one because the assessment literacy conversation and the academic integrity conversation have sort of happened in fairly separate ways. There hasn't been a lot of connection of the two. I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that perhaps they might be supportive of each other. So, assessment literacy being this idea that students need to understand how assessment works, what it is. Some people even bundle in students needing to understand ideas about the quality of their work and the work of others in there as well. If students understand what assessment's for and why we're getting them to do it, I'm willing to buy the argument that they may be less likely to try and cheat their way through it. I was having a chat with an academic integrity colleague recently, and one of the ideas that we came to was with this. I don't want to drop, because it's got a swear word, I don't want to drop Nick Milne into it, but the tasks that were bullshit, we thought maybe students are more likely to cheat on the bullshit tasks. I don't know. This is something I put to Twitter recently, and people were pretty on board with that idea as well. But I expect that really deeply understanding the tasks might help students to understand things they think are just busy work or whatever are there for a reason, and actually doing them really does matter.
Excellent. This is more of an instructional, I think my interpretation of this question. The next question is more of an instructional piece. It says, what are your top 3 tips for discerning contract cheating? How effective are interviews with students when contract cheating is suspected?
All right, so I think interviews with students can be quite helpful. The first caveat I always say is check out what your institutional processes are, and every student is deserving of due process and whatever's been agreed to around that. I think that sort of talking with a team about contract cheating and what it is probably the single biggest thing I think we should do. So more talk about it, more understanding of it. Talk with students, talk with academics. So there's that. There's keeping an eye out for things that look really not right, that look outside of the scope of this. If you've marked 1,000 of these and they always sit within here, and you've got one that's far out over that way, there's something going on with it that we need to look at. It might be contract cheating, it might not. It might be far out over there because they don't use any of the readings that you've used in class, and they use all of these other really weird references. It might be far out because the APA style is perfect, and no one ever does a perfect APA. Could be all sorts of things. But developing that idea that, gee, there's something different happening on this, and talking to someone at the institution who has expertise in that. And I guess finally, it's probably learning to use some of the tools to really understand the technical stuff behind it. So one of them might be looking at who's the author on this piece. When you get that kind of hunch, is the author the student's name? How many times has this been edited? From where has it been edited? Or using some of the various technologies that you have at your institution.
There's a fair bit of work. I'll say a lot of work we need to do as a collective to enhance how we do assessments and how we foster the culture of integrity in institution. Now, this one is another long-winded question, but I actually thought I'll pick this one out as well as our longer-term strategies to move away from end-of-semester exams to more authentic during semester assessments. There's still the short-term need to find affordable strategies to improve the academic integrity of fully online, non-invigilated exams. There will also be an ongoing need in some cases, such as for accreditation, where final exams will occur. Do you have some advice for how you will design and deal with the exams in this context, that is fully online exams in the LMS that are not invigilated? This is back to one of the work RMIT Online started doing, which is looking at assessment equivalence. So yeah, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to buy myself some time really quickly and tack something onto my previous answer. I really want to refer people to some of the work that TEXA has supported around contract cheating detection, and a really great sort of checklist that's up there. I don't want to mention all the people who developed that because I'll forget some of them, but there's some really good sort of checklisty type things to look for around contract cheating. So hopefully someone's got the URL for that. Now, on the issue of how are we going to secure sort of unsupervised online exams? I don't know. I really prefer we didn't do unsupervised online exams. I just think the exam format doesn't really give us anything. Like, why are we doing this in an exam format where there's all sorts of other types of assessment open to us? We do exams primarily to deal with the problems of cheating. I know there's other arguments around, it sets a level playing field, so everyone's doing the same task at the same time, in the same circumstances, or the exam is easier to mark because for some reason we've decided we never need to give feedback comments on exams. It's an interesting thing that we've all decided to agree to. But why are we doing an unsupervised online exam? What does that give us that an assignment wouldn't give us? I'll tell you some things it does give us that we don't like, is that it says to everyone, you have to make time at this point in your life to do this task right here, right now, at home, dependent on your equipment, dependent on your childcare arrangements, your living arrangements, and all of those. So we do have some sacrifices. If we're doing it so that we don't have to give feedback comments to students, hey, let's just be honest. Let's say we're setting a final summative assignment for you and we're not going to provide feedback comments. And there are sometimes legitimate reasons why we might want to do that. We might have a feedback design in a unit of study where we front load the feedback, where we really focus in that first 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks on spending our limited staff time budget on wonderful feedback there. So we might say, hey, the final task is just going to be grade and a justification of the grade and no helpful comments. But yeah, so I'd really throw back the challenge of, if you're not going to have this for any security benefits, why are you having it as an exam?
Piggybacking on that question, what are your strategies to reduce ghostwriting in online exams?
Mm. So I think some type of supervision is really necessary to do that, or running it through your sort of usual processes like you would with an assignment. So, proctoring, etc., could be an approach. There are some assignment writing platforms people use now. So, they're things like Cadmus or something where people might write an assignment, and I believe they have the ability to look at some of the back end stuff, though. They've sort of pivoted away from being more of the assessment security type pitch to being more of a integrity type pitch. So, some sort of supervision and or some sort of approach where you look at the work that students have produced afterwards and run it through your usual processes, marker suspicions, doing some sort of looking at the metadata, running it through authorship or something like that.
By the way, I would like to call out Lorraine Hurley. She seems to be very active in responding to questions and tagging on questions. Well done, Lorraine. I used to work with Lorraine in a past life at ACU, very passionate lecturer and academic. I'll take another question. Now, this one is a little bit of a debate. It says, how is it possible to teach integrity matters when it clearly doesn't work in the world? We've got challenges in terms of fake news, which is widespread. Scientists, including Dan O'Reilly, I hope I pronounced that correctly, accused of manipulating data. The ivermectin, social media politicians, the list is ongoing. Why should we trust AI with matters of integrity? We've seen what happened to the robo-death victims, the suicides, and why would we enable vulnerable young people to be AI'd?
Oh, great question. So I'm going to take this as sort of a two-parter. There's the how can we promote integrity in a world where it doesn't seem to matter, and then the sort of AI type part of it. I agree that we're in a strange world now where it increasingly appears that alternate facts and fake news and all of that is part of our lexicon and part of our understandings. And you've got Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, that he didn't actually write, but you can have your, main intellectual property, if you want to call it that, be ghostwritten and become the president and all of that. So we are in a bit of a strange world. But I think as well, we're in a world where truth does actually matter more than ever. We say it doesn't, but our very lives are right now on the line, depending on what governments and health organizations and whatever do around a whole bunch of scientific debates. Truth matters a lot. Really high quality research evidence in support of things like vaccines matters so much. So I think it does really matter, but people have been able to skirt by without it. And I think we try and draw the conversation onto those things where it really does. Yeah, there's debate and all that, and people are getting ahead in unscrupulous ways. And the reference to that particular researcher, I believe, is a reference to a researcher who provided some of the best evidence in support of honour codes, which I talked about before, has been found to have done fraudulent research in the research on honour codes. So, we've got a problem, but it matters more than ever. And there are researchers out there, trying to do things to help address that. And there's researchers looking at various sort of sham medical science research that's being published and try to bring that to account and try to show that, it does matter. And we've got new techniques and approaches to show it. I really think that in the future, we're going to have bigger and better technologies that are going to be used retrospectively on things that were done in the past. I think the things that we say now, the things that we write now, are going to be evaluated by future technologies to show where it is that we have cheated or been dishonest or something like that. We should be very wary of that. On to the second part, the AI part. Yeah, robo-debt's a problem, and that whole fiasco is a horrible thing. And it was definitely an example of how, I mean, calling it AI might even be going too far. Algorithmic decision-making really ruined a lot of people's lives. It's horrible. So I do think we need to hold it to account. In the book, I've got a whole chapter about AI in this space and propose some sort of criteria under which we might want to sort of question AI. One of the things that's really important with any use of AI in this space, or really anywhere else that's high stakes, is that we do what's called human in the loop AI. So we do AI where there's a person involved. If a real caring, thinking person had been involved in each one of those robo-debt cases before that robo-debt letter was sent out, to really honestly scrutinize it, to look at the facts, the data, to have some empathy, I reckon far fewer of those letters would have been sent out. Yeah, so human in the loop is where we got to go.
Human in the loop. I'll take that on board. I think we probably have an opportunity for maybe 2 more questions. We'll see how we go. Now, this is just looking onward, and this question is around opportunities for us to work collectively on these issues, e-cheating and assessment security. How do we empower the sector to do this?
How do we empower the sector to actually look at e-cheating and assessment security? I mean, I think part of it's, as always, a resourcing question. And I know that we are in a really, really hard time in Australia and elsewhere all over the world in terms of resourcing for teaching and learning in higher education. I think we've got to start seeing this as a priority, but there are a lot of other priorities. So finding the way to resource it is a big one. And, you know, I think in some places like in Australia, the sector made a really big deal about it. TEXA established, you know, a unit. It's led by Helen Neal, who is doing some great work in the sort of assessment security space. So I think that when we make a big noise about it, we can sometimes get a little bit more resourcing. I think as well, we need to stop trying to secure every task. I think at the moment, we're really worried about if students cheat in any task at university. And I'm probably going to sound like a, I don't know, slapdash sort of person here, but I don't care about every task at university in terms of cheating in the same way. I care about some tasks a lot. When we look at a degree, we can spot those key moments of assessment that matter at the degree level for us to say this student is capable of what the degree says you can do with it. We need to secure those acts of assessment. There's a lot of other acts of assessment we don't need to try so hard to address. So I think some of it's about reapportioning our efforts, just as I talked about with feedback earlier, where, you know, with feedback, we might want to start focusing more on earlier tasks and less on later tasks. It's kind of the reverse with assessment security. We want to focus more on those later degree level, really important tasks. Then I think as well, the last way that I'd say to empower ourselves to do something about it is to accept that we'll never be perfect on this. We won't. What we want is sort of, you know, in my talks and stuff, people might have heard this before, but a sort of Swiss cheese model, lots of different layers of approaches that are pretty good approaches. And here we have the honour codes as a great example. They do something to help. They don't solve the whole problem, but I think they're a good thing. We have academic integrity modules. We have text matching, remote proctored exams, stylometrics, programmatic assessment. We have a lot of different approaches. We want to try and do a lot of those approaches not expecting any of them to be perfect, but expecting them to be pretty good when put together.
Yeah. We're 10 minutes to the end of the session. I'm just going to squeeze in one more question so we have enough time to say thank yous. And I'm toying between looking at the screen and maybe picking up from what was submitted. I probably would take one from Professor Elizabeth Moore. On that, let's go with Peter Wagstaff. It says, to what extent are students using similarity services such as Turnitin as plagiarism, laundering services, highlighting cheating that they need to hide from their lecturers?
Wonderful to have a question from you, Wags. And I remember Wags as one of the more sort of alternative, even renegade teachers at Monash when I was there. Had some great chats with Wags. I don't know. I think, yeah, this is a potential thing. Students running a task through a tool like Turnitin to try and, gradually reduce the amount of the plagiarism that's caught. I think that might be a thing that's happening. I think, though, there's also a set of students who are running their work through Turnitin in a formative sense legitimately to cut down on what they didn't know was plagiarism. I got to tell you as well, the book, I ran that through the, Authenticate, which is sort of like the Turnitin for research manuscripts. I ran it through that and it caught some things for me because nobody's perfect. So I did that in a, formative sense, found some things that I needed to fix up and fix them up. So I do think there's a legitimate use for students in doing that. And I think there's a dodgy use in it. And I can tell you back in my more renegade teaching days, the first task in one of my units was to copy paste a piece from Wikipedia into Turnitin, get a 100% match, and then turn that into a 0% match while still plagiarizing entirely. And I used that as an educative approach to show that it's not just about the matching of the text, it's about the ideas. And that led to some great conversations around, the plagiarism of ideas and attributing to sources and how showing where your ideas come from strengthens your work. It doesn't make it worse. So yeah, maybe there's the laundering thing, which is a great phrase, but I think there's also a lot of legitimate pedagogical use.
Excellent. So one more question, and thanks for being here and responding to these. This is sort of related to the previous question. It says, what are some, and I'm just trying to bring the session to a nice wrap up. What are some strategies for dealing with students who, because of poor time management or circumstances beyond their control, believe they have no option but to cheat?
All right, so the glib, really easy response to this is tell them that they have another option. But I think there's a real bit of truth to that. I think students sometimes don't know the degree to which we are actually flexible, the degree to which there are legitimate supports or way they can get a little bit more time. I think we need to be a lot clearer with students around that and reduce some of the barriers and challenges that are there around that. I mean, there's a discussion to be had about inflexible due dates in general, that we need to talk about why we have due dates. And that's a whole debate that always ends up with, in the real world, you don't get any extensions on your stuff and everything's always due with a hard deadline or whatever. And I may have done most of my working life in the sheltered world of universities, but most of my work is to some degree flexible with some notable exceptions. So we might want to challenge the idea of inflexible due dates, but yeah, we really need to get through to students to let them know these are the ways that you can get help. Don't turn to those sites. And I think, say, some universities are doing things like site blocking to, if you are on their network and you go to a cheating site, you can't go to it and you just get a block. I'd love to see, rather than just a Cisco network blocked thing, you get, hey, you're going to one of these sites, we know about these, we have other ways that you can get help. If you are stuck for time, if you're under pressure, whatever, here's how you can address this in a legitimate way.
Really, really, really good advice. I think it also goes to one of my I'll call it my values, which is teach students how to be students, excite them in the learning, engage them in the process of creating the assessments and doing the assessments, and maybe that way we could reduce cheating. And back to your point, we might not be perfect, but these are all teachable moments. I'd like to say a big thank you to Professor Phil Dawson for being part of today's Q&A sessions. This session was created out of the passion I had from reading your book, Defending Assessment Security in a Digital World, Preventing E-Cheating and Supporting Academic Integrity in Higher Education. For those who haven't read the book, I would encourage you to pick up a copy. I think what is pivotal to the book is actually learning about the strategies that have worked and seeing how you can apply that across your institutions. On a bigger scale, it would be good to start learning how these strategies are working across your institution in the form of knowledge sharing. I think that would also help Phil understand how his book is impacted and see areas for improvement as well. So I would also like to say thank you to CRADLE, the Center for Research Assessment in Digital Learning. I hope I got that right, for being in partnership with Integrity Matters at Turnitin. If you haven't subscribed to Integrity Matters by Turnitin, feel free to follow us on socials or reach out to us and we can share the link with you. If anyone in Turnitin is on the call, please put that the link to the YouTube channel if anyone wants to be part of it. The purpose of that Integrity Matters by Turnitin is to create a space or platform where we can share knowledge, encourage expertise in assessment, teaching and learning, especially academic integrity as well. Thank you so much, Phil. And I hope everyone who's been on the call we've been able to share some really good words of wisdom or strategies, and feel free to send us your feedback when you need to. Thank you again, Phil.
Thank you so much for co-hosting this with us. It's been an absolute joy to chat with you about this. I've really appreciated your facilitation and questioning everyone's question, everyone who's pitched questions to us. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions. We'd love to continue a conversation with people in various ways. Follow us on Twitter and all of that. And if you like seminars like this as well, the other thing I would recommend is CRADLE Seminar Program, which this is also a part of. We have a whole bunch of really interesting speakers on all sorts of topics in assessment, digital learning and higher education.
Excellent. Stay safe, everyone.